Our next session is a panel session where we've heard from Ian and Courtney about a lot of the practicalities around managing freestall and compost barns. We've had a bit about the economic performance of these farms, and now we're going to invite a couple of farmers and an industry representative to come up, and they're open to you for all your burning questions. First of all, I will invite Karen Romano from Dairy Australia. Karen leads the Feeding and Farm Systems program at Dairy Australia and is responsible for the Adapting Farm Systems program or body of work, which is underway. And Simon Scowen, who is also our host farm for tomorrow. Simon manages Manning Valley Dairy at Wingham. And a very, very generous Colin Thompson has also joined us. Colin, you're now on screen. Unfortunately, Colin happens to live in the path of flood water, and he tells me this morning there's 2 metres of water on the road past their dairy, so he's obviously unable to be here today, but has very generously offered to zoom in and still be part of the panel. So thank you, Colin. To the people in the room, we've got about 150 people. Colin, I don't think can you see them?
You can see the room, yes.
Yes. You can. All right. Thanks, Colin. If you could just give a quick introduction to you, your business.
Sure. Thanks, Shana. And again, sorry I can't be there today, and hopefully this is working. So we farm here in the Lachlan Valley. I guess my journey onto to intensive farming started on the south coast on a small dairy farm there, and in 2000 we relocated our business to Cowra and began on a process there, a journey that led us to a more intensive system, a system that was designed right from the start to be intensive, and so that's where we are now. We're currently milking around 320 cows. Our herd is fully housed, including all our dry stock and our young stock. We farm around 250 pivots to grow all our own fodder and some of our own grain. And so Lachlan Valley, why we came here, it's an area that it does boast very fertile valleys. There's quite a few farming commodities around, and also boasts some pretty fantastic water views at times.
Who'd have thought? Thank you, Colin. And I will say, Colin is also running on a generator at the moment, so we may have a few technical difficulties, but we've got you so far, Colin. Thank you. Simon, I might hand over to you next, if you could introduce yourself and perhaps a bit about your experience previously as well.
Yep. So my name's Simon Scowen. So my wife and I together, until recently, our 2 sons manage Manning Valley Dairy at Wingham. So basically we're a family-run corporate farm, and so Manning Valley Dairy is 320 hectares, of which 240 is effective milking area. We've got 900 cows on that 240 hectares, so a very high stocking rate, for over 4 cows per hectare. So yeah, we did a SWOT analysis of our business, and there was a couple of things that really stood out. Our reliance on board-in feed is greater than 60%, some years over 70%. And then we've got 6.5 k's frontage to the Manning River, so our access to water is wonderful. We've got a wonderful water right, and more than a third of our farm is beautiful alluvial country. So we have the ability to grow a lot of feed, but under our current, under the current irrigation system, we were lucky to graze 12 tonnes of the hectare. So by cropping that country, we can treble that production. Corn crop rotated with ryegrass crop, we realised that we could really reduce our reliance on board-in feed, but we've got to have somewhere to feed them. So that's what the path we've gone down. We've investigated shedding our cows, and we currently have a DA in at the local council here to put in a 800 cow compost barn.
Thanks, Simon. And Karen, over to you.
Thanks, Sheena. Karen Romano, so I'm the National Lead for Feeding and Farm Systems based at Dairy Australia. Grew up on a dairy farm, have a career spanning 30 years in the industry, primarily extension, working within grazing systems. In my role now, I've been in it for almost 2 years, and I'm charged with delivering and program leadership in the space of areas to support farmers shifting or moving towards intensification. So it's about looking at, well, where are the gaps in Australia in terms of your knowledge gaps and what do you need, and then putting in a power of work behind the scenes to make sure that we have this information that you require to have a smoother transition to an intensive system. So I look forward to sharing some of those resources later today, Sheena. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. And as I mentioned, our economic work and social research work augments some Northern Victorian work, and that'll help feed into some of the tools that Dairy Australia is developing. Colin, I might just flick back to you. Obviously, you outlined that you'd come from a coastal pasture-based system and moved inland to the Lockyer Valley. What was the driving force behind going to an intensive system? What was your motivation?
Okay, thanks, Shana. I guess the motivation for relocating in the first instance was we saw that our coastal operation was going to be too small under deregulation, and we needed to expand. And then moving to intensive system, I guess it's something that I was always had in mind, but probably one of the key motivators were firstly reducing risk, and to have a system that wasn't impacted by environmental change and changing climatic conditions, and possibly if there was never an argument for going intensive, it's right here, right now, and we're seeing, and you've probably all seen the footage of what's happening here in the Lachlan Valley right now with carnage everywhere and floods and crops and bridges, roads, all destroyed, but yet the cows are quite comfortable and dry in their freestall barn. They're still making around 43 litres of milk a day and blissfully unaware of what's happening around them. So, but also not only risk of flood, but risk of drought. We wanted a system that was not impacted by drought, that wouldn't run out of feed. We did run into a drought when we first relocated to Cowra, and I came pretty determined fairly quickly that we were going to somehow mitigate that risk of running out of feed. So we've expanded our cropping area and become more intense and to produce more food than we require for the dairy, and have mitigated our feed risk that way. I guess the other driving factor too, Shana, was we wanted to be able to express the full potential of our cows, our land, our resources, and to see the cows actually fully fed all of the time in a comfortable, clean environment, and allows them to fully express their genetic potential. That was certainly a driving factor. To me, intensive dairy, it's really about getting more from less, more milk from less cows, more fodder production from less area, and just being able to utilise our resources better. Probably the third reason or factor was to have a facility that was good to work in, that would attract employees, and that contained modern technology and ideas, and so have a system that was sustainable and reliable. So there's some of the factors behind why we've moved to this system, Shana.
Thanks, Colin. Yes, and I guess it's that consistency, and your cows are certainly getting that, as you mentioned, despite the challenges you're facing at the moment. Simon, you have previous experience with intensive dairies before moving to this region. So obviously you've got experience that you can draw on. Why are you looking at a TMR compost system in the mid-coast of New South Wales? What are your motivators?
Ease of management. I've managed a TMR operation before. It's very easy to pigeonhole staff. They do the same thing every day of the year, although that might bore some of us to tears from a staff point of view. it gets very easy. Under a pasture-based system, the cows ran out of grass today, they had too much grass, you know, water trough leaked, blah, 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 all the inconsistencies, and that's why we see our dipstick vary so much from day to day under a pasture-based system. It's hot today, humid, the cows are going to go for the trees, so it's going to be cooler tomorrow, you know, they'll eat a bit more grass tomorrow. All those variations in management is very hard under a pasture-based system. With a TMR, or you know, the same thing happens every day. The recipe stays the same. And yeah, so from a labour point of view, you know, you can have your milking team, you can have your cropping team. From an ease of management time, you know, time off and the stuff. I think it's very easy to roster staff on under that system and manage that system. So from a personal point of view, and especially in a corporate, you know, scene as well, I think, you know, pasture management is very difficult. But to train someone in a TMR system, I think is a lot easier.
Yep.
You rely, you know, you have your advisors that you rely upon a lot more. So it's probably a little bit more textbook farming, I guess, than gut feel farming.
Yep, excellent. Karen, from your perspective as the national lead of this program, are you hearing common sort of stories from other farmers in other regions as to why either they have adopted these systems or why they might be interested in moving to them?
Thanks, Sheena. In a national role, I guess it's a great opportunity to get to seek to understand the variations in these systems from state to state, from region to region. And you're right, the motivators or the reasons that people are driven to make a change towards intensification is quite different on a personal basis, but also in a regional basis. And so that's very important to seek out why is someone trying to make a change away from their current business? What's driving that change? And then what type of feeding or housing infrastructure might help to resolve the issues of concern that they're trying to mitigate? Because it's not cookie cutter, it's not the same solution or outcome for every single farm business. And that's where tools that we've been developed will help farmers make a more informed decision about what type of change is needed to mitigate issues they're trying to address.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Colin, I'm just going to ask each of our panellists one more question and then I'll throw it open to the floor, so get your questions ready. But Colin, this seems like a ridiculous question to ask you right at this moment, but what are some of the biggest challenges that you have faced in your time operating at a TMR farm out around Cowra?
Yeah, we certainly have faced a few challenges over the years, over the 20 years that we've been in this area and intensive farming. I guess initially some of the initial challenges were that there was not a lot of information, not only within the dairy industry, but also within the regulators and the local councils, and that led to some pretty significant planning issues that we had to work our way through, and it was very much taken the wrong way by council that was very inexperienced in this area, and that certainly led to some issues. But eventually we did get on top of that. Probably the other thing that we had to learn, it was a very big learning curve for us, and you know, learning to farm in a different area under a different system, and that took some time too, and then working our way through the Millennium Drought in an area that we were unfamiliar with. That was also a very big a challenge for us, and hence the reason that I was determined to ensure that this operation did become drought-proof and self-sustaining in fodder and largely in our grain production as well. So some of the other challenges, I suppose, was simply just not. You know, we made lots of mistakes. Some people ask, what would you do different? Well, pretty much everything, I suppose, because we learnt the hard way. And it's certainly great to be able to see different farmers now and go to different farms and doing this farming system. So we had to learn the hard way and work things out, I suppose. But anyway, we did persevere. And I guess one thing that hasn't changed Shona, is our view of having a system that was sustainable, that was profitable, and that could be high production, high potential, and a system that actually worked, regardless of the seasonal conditions. That goal hasn't changed, and I believe that we're some way closer to achieving that.
Fantastic. Thanks, Colin. Yeah, and I think this is a common theme that's come out in our social science. Part of our intensification project is very much around that challenges and in getting the right information and dealing with councils, etc. Which, on that note, Simon, I might flick to you, because I think you've actually, well, apart from challenges, I think you've had a reasonably good experience. Is that right, with council in your
yes and no.
journey?
I guess, similar to Colin's experience, even now, like in our council, we're probably this is the first project they've seen presented to them. So they've got a steep learning curve. The effluent, in our DA, they wanted our effluent plan to refer to the guidelines from 2008. They were even oblivious that the guidelines had been updated in 2020. So we had to even alert them to, you're dealing with the wrong guidelines, guys. But they've been open and receptive. We have 31 neighbours that we had to, as you'll see tomorrow, those that go out home, we've got 31 neighbours that we had to approach, and we were very fortunate, and this was, something we were really scared of. A lot of them are blockies, 5 acre, people that come up from Sydney, look, love their view and everything else, and all of a sudden you want to put a whopping great big shed in front of them. We did not have one objection. So, so far, it's still in the DA process, so we haven't got the green tick yet. But one thing, one thing I love being about a dairy farmer is we're all open to, and we don't mind admitting our mistakes. We don't mind sharing ideas as an industry. There's no secrets. We've been so fortunate to be able to go, to other businesses that have already gone through this transition, speak to them, why did they do things, what did they do wrong, and learn from that. And that's just been so beneficial for us. Our plans have changed numerous times after talking to different farmers, and the trials and tribulations they've gone through. We hope our plans are the best. But no doubt everyone's going to make mistakes, and we'll learn from them. But it allows us to mould the shed and the intensification that we're going down to suit our business.
Fantastic, thanks, Simon. Yes, I think it's from the trip down to Echuca in May earlier this year, the Raising the Roof event. That, I think, was one of the key messages from the farmers. Was really, the whole process. It takes time. And I can't remember who it was, said, allow even more time just to make sure you've got it right. Karen, in terms of Simon spoke about the guidelines. Can you give us a bit of an update around and guidelines and other resources that are in the pipeline?
Yeah, thanks, Sheena. So, in relation to national guidelines, we did have guidelines for Victoria-based in 2010 associated with feed pads and freestall systems. We're at the cusp of launching national guidelines for feed pads and contained systems, which will be relevant Australia-wide. So this will be your go-to place for the engineering standards for building these systems, the planning requirements for building these systems, the management requirements, and so on and so forth. So it's very unique. We've used international research to underpin these guidelines, and it's a first for our country. And certainly if you're thinking or contemplating making a change towards including feeding or housing infrastructure in your farm business, this is the place to go if you're a farmer or you're a person advising farmers in this space. So a very valuable resource to be launched towards the end of this year. Other pieces of information that are available to support your thinking include as Sheena's presented to you today, the economics of TMR systems. Now, the research that Sheena has presented to you has been replicated in Victoria with another 7 farm systems, looking at data across, at the moment, 5 financial years. Now, this particular piece of research in Victoria will be extended to 7. And why that's important is that we know when we go through a process in transitioning from a given system to a TMR system, that there's a lag phase, and there's this a period where you need to learn to operate that system better. So you don't become a TMR system overnight and all of a sudden producing the maximum potential for that business, and we're capturing that journey. So we intend to combine those data sets and into the future extend it to QDAF data in Queensland and also farms that we have in South Australia. And so we'll keep building on that data set, and for the first time we'll have a unique set of TMR data to start informing your decisions and understands, well, what are we aiming for in terms of performance in those systems. We're also working on a very large piece at the moment, which is a decision support process to help farmers and advisors work out, well, what is the right system that I need to move towards in terms of feeding and housing infrastructure? Because many of you have already gone through the journey, and Simon and Colin, you'd recognise this. There are so many questions to answer and know, and things that you need to address before you make this change. And so through the use of some technical subject matter experts, we've attempted, through taking the lead at Dairy Australia, to develop a decision support process to capture all the key questions, the logic that you need to think about before you make a change towards intensification to help inform your decision making. And what that means is you'll be well set up to know, well, here's my existing position, this is where I want to move to, and you'll be able to identify the knowledge and support that you need to make a smoother, more successful transition towards intensification into the future.
Yeah, that's good to see and know that there'll be some support for an area of investment that needs a lot of support with the the number of things that you need to get right. With that, thank you, Karen and Simon and Colin. I'd just like to open it up to the floor. Does anyone have a question for any of our panellists? Trevor.
Thanks, Sheena. Trevor Middle from Gloucester. Karen, with the coastal sprawl, which we happen to be on today, being more and more intensified itself, we seem to have councillors coming into all those regions with their own agendas. With these guidelines, which I applaud DA for actually bringing them through to the forefront, but with that being these guidelines put in front of those respective councils, what's going to be their legal obligations to follow them if they have their own agendas?
It's a good question, and it is a minefield because every LGA, local government council, has a different set of rules that we need to learn and understand. With the national guidelines, we are working on what are the key components from a planning perspective that you need to address when you're moving in towards intensification. And as Simon alluded, he had 31 neighbours, so understanding separation distances and the requirements if you're a grazing system with feeding infrastructure, or where you're stepping across the line towards some intensification, what are the rules associated with that? One of the people that's been working closely with us to help align the information that councils are using nationally is Scott McDonald. So Scott's been working with each state to work on the environmental codes, the effluent managed guidelines, to make sure that we're in a position where we have consistency about the information that's provided in each state as we're moving towards intensification. It's a work in process. I know Zeta in New South Wales is working on the environmental guidelines here. And as we do all these incremental pieces of work, it increases the information that we supply in front of councils to make sure they're most informed about the requirements when we build these types of systems. Other learnings through Scott MacDonald has been the importance of engagement with the local council up front, and understanding that we might need to actually handhold and inform those councils along the way. And so we have specialist people in place that have actually developed their businesses to support farmers to navigate the planning towards intensification of these farm systems. Now, these people are critical to have part of your team. You've got a number of really great ones based here in New South Wales, and some of those ones based in New South Wales travel across state boundaries. So happy to give you some linkages to those people, but they're so critical to having your team up front to have a smoother transition with council.
Thanks, Karen. Any other questions? Yes, in the middle, and then Phil after. Just up here, Robin. Yep. Thanks.
Thank you. Philip Schultz from Northern Victoria. Hi, Colin. Good to see you. I just hope things improve out in your part of the world very soon. It's such a beautiful area. Colin, I'd be really interested in your thoughts, your experiences with cubicles, with sand bedding, flood washing, recycling, etc. And given that there's a significant percentage of more of facilities going in on farms that are based around a manure pack type system, have you got any, say, advice or thoughts, or do you think there is a herd size that might be more suited to a pack type system, more so than a cubicle system? And with the workload of your cubicles, just your thoughts on that, because I think even the manure pack systems, the standard operating procedures and daily workloads might be a little bit surprising to some people. I'm just wondering your thoughts on that.
Did you get that, Colin?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. And I think I got most of that. I think the question relates to our decision to go with a freestall barn on sand, and it's certainly a good question and a very pertinent question, I think. I guess at the end of the day, I'm fairly risk adverse, and so I chose the path of least risk, and to me that was a sand bedding. We initially, when we built the freestalls, we did try composted solids and putting back into the beds. We tried rice hulls, we tried all sorts of things. At the end of the day, I had to bite the bullet and adapt our system for sand, and that meant putting in sand lanes for sand separation. We already had an effluent system that could separate solids and irrigate water out, that could spread sludge and all that sort of thing. So we actually see our effluent system as a resource, and one that's becoming more valuable as we see fertiliser prices increasing. But I guess the beauty that I like, or the thing that the reason I chose sand was that it's just so, I guess, safe, and inorganic material that cows are bedded on. And we've seen, 100 mils of rain just this last few days, and strong winds blowing in there, and it has no impact on the sand at all. The fans quickly dry the sand, and no impact on the cow's health or the bedding material. There are some issues with sand, of course, and it does tend to wear out pumps and so forth. But I think the technology, if we obviously based a lot of our information on information out of the US and what's happening there, and the golden rule is for sand bedding there, and so we didn't want to, I guess, venture too far away from that advice that we were getting. And so I understand that others are looking at different kinds of bedding, and really, I think at the end of the day, it's how well it's managed, and some people have a fear of freestalls. I'm not sure whether they see it as an additional cost or additional workload to manage them. But certainly we've found that we have a system now that the sand is very easily to manage. We recycle around 85% of our sand, so there is very low cost of bedding. It's very safe and reliable for the cows, and that's the system that we've chosen to use. And we do, all our heifers from 7 months up are in freestall barns now, and at times we do use dry compost for those beds. In the heifers, you know, we have a bit more flexibility with them, but when it gets wet like it is at the moment, we use sand in those beds as well. So I guess, Phil, yeah, that's why we've chosen to go down that to the path of sand bedding and freestall. I think there's good information on both systems now, and certainly the freestall buns are coming out ahead in terms of price, it seems, on cost of build, given the area required and the cost of building materials that are required for sheds and so forth these days. So I hope that answers the question, Phil.
Thanks, Colin. Thanks, Phil. Phil Ryan, you had a question.
Thanks, Sheena. And Colin and Simon, thank you very much for sharing your experience. You've mentioned, both of you, some of the many risks that you're seeking to manage through your intensive systems. Perhaps particularly to Simon, with your impending build, wondering what your thoughts are on the risks with increased costs of steel, concrete, interest rates, etc., and committing to what I would comfortably imagine is a higher cost of production for the whole future, I guess, of your dairies, where perhaps a grazing system is going to have a potential at least lower cost of production, particularly in better seasons, whereas I would imagine your cost of production are going to be fairly constantly higher. And perhaps to Sheena and Karen, whether there is a particular herd size where you see that intensification becoming more compelling as an argument.
Simon, over to you first.
As far as cost of production goes, we're actually going to reduce our cost of production on a cents per litre basis. We're going to get a better feed conversion efficiency to what we're doing now. I think as Ian mentioned before, like heat stress here is a huge thing. Also, currently our exposure to bought-in feed is huge, so it's a bit of risk mitigation. So we're less exposed to risk by being more reliant. You know, one thing that somebody that's associated with council said, well, you're actually becoming less intensive. Of course, a lot of councils actually measure intensification by how much stuff is brought from outside the farm gate. So we're actually going to be bringing less feed from outside the farm gate inside. So even though I consider we're becoming more intensive, by their definition, we're becoming less intensive. So yes, it is a big investment. We have seen a huge increase in milk price as well. I think the illusion that we're a low-cost pasture-based industry in Australia no longer stacks up. We're not a low-cost pasture-based industry. With the cost of feed, the cost of labour, cost of our land, especially in this coastal region, to dairy, to utilise what I call the small amount of pasture from the very expensive land that we own on the coast. It's not a very good return on investment, and we've got to maximise the feed that we can produce from that expensive land. And by this sort of system is one way that we can keep up that return on investment from the increasing in land price.
Great, thanks, Simon. The question about herd size, Karen, did you want to say something?
I can speak about the work that Scott McDonald has put forward. So he has over 130 clients he's been working with nationally in his role through Agriculture Victoria to support farmers to transition towards intensification of their farm businesses. Within his client base, looking at compost, better pack barns, the size has been up to generally about 800 cows for those type of systems. Once you're moving across that number and we're heading over the thousands to 2, and sometimes we've got 3,000 cow systems, we're seeing more interest in towards a free stall type system, and that relates to the area that you need to provide for animals in those type of systems. But I'm happy to share those numbers that Scott's pulled together over a time frame from 2010 to 2022. So tells a unique story of the transition of the industry.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Karen. Is that answer your question, Phil? Yep. Right. Thank you. Look, lunch is at 12, so got one more question? Yes.
Mine's not a question, it's to Simon. Make sure you get the width of your shed right, because later on you might want to install a 6-row freestall barn. Okay, because, excuse me, I haven't seen a good composted barn yet, but I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you. No, that's one thing we have factored in is the width of the barn. Our designer has factored in that it can be converted to a 6-row. Yeah, we'll elaborate more on that tomorrow, but yeah, the way we've designed it, it can be retrofitted to freestall if for some reason it doesn't work.
Excellent. Plan A, Plan B. There's a man in the room, Butch Smith. You've always got a Plan A and a Plan B and a Plan C to Z. Good stuff. Look, I think we will just wrap up. I might just ask each of our panellists just to provide us with one thing that you see is vital to consider when you're investing in these systems. Colin, I'll start with you. What's your ram at home? One thing, don't forget about this.
One thing, Shona, that narrows it down fairly well, and I'm having trouble with that actually, but as I said earlier, intensive dairy, it's not just about building barns or infrastructure, it's a system, it's a farming system, and you know there's a lot of parts that go towards making it successful. If I can have three things, Shona, I would say that firstly you need commitment, commitment to change, commitment to learn to do things different, and to adopt new ideas and technology. The second thing, obviously, you need investment, and lots of it. There's a lot of dollars tied up in these systems, and you need to understand that investment to ensure that there's a good return on the investment that you make. And probably the third thing I'd put in there is skills, management skills, upskilling staff and even farm managers to understand how these systems work and to get the best out of them. Thanks, Shona.
Beautiful. I'll give you a third for each point. That's one. Brilliant. Thank you. And I think words of wisdom, well and truly. Simon.
Yeah, I think it's all about planning. You know, you can't rush into these things. You've got to do all the planning. You've got to talk to as many people as you can. You know, search out as much advice as you can from those that have been there and done it before, as well as all the advisors. And you know, throw everything in the bag and don't dismiss anything.
No. What works for you? Karen, your one thing.
My one thing is start with the end in mind, and that means take that longer term approach to where your business may be 5, 10, 15 years from now, because once you invest in concrete and steel, it's pretty hard to unpick it. So spend the time up front. It might take you 2, 3 years to plan what you're intending to do, but that will pay dividends down the track. So slow down, don't rush. We'll all get there in the end.
Fantastic. So apologies for pulling it up short. It's going to be lunch now, so make the most of Simon and Karen certainly, and catch up with them if you have questions. And obviously, Colin, a heartfelt thank you to you for still putting aside the time today to be part of the panel under extremely trying circumstances. So thank you. And thank you to Karen for your contribution, and Simon. And Simon, we look forward to seeing you out on the farm tomorrow. So thank you, and please join me in thanking the panellists.